Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our Big Book 12-Step Workshop. Please join me in prayer for an open mind. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, the 12 steps, and you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my brokenness, the 12 steps, and especially you. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So we spent quite a while, actually a couple months, warming up to the step work. And I don't mean to dismiss the work that we did. There was an orientation to all the administration as well as the protocol is for you to be using this workshop in a most effective way. I introduced you to the purpose in the Spiritual Awakening, the appendix, in the big book, so that we get really clear on the vision. What's our purpose? And whenever we find ourselves bogged down or negative or overwhelmed with the suffering and or just the tediousness of the work, we can hold that vision up. Oh, yeah, that's right. I want to wake up. I don't know that this will be the process, but a lot of people have had the experience of changing, of waking up, of having more consciousness and reducing their suffering. Okay, I'm going to believe that and do the best I can to show up and do the work in between. Then the step 11 helps us to become more conscious. I hope that you've included some form of what I call intentional consciousness in your daily routine, whatever that means for you. Everybody's different. Please don't think at all in any of this work that there's a cookie cutter, because there's not, that there's a formula, because there's not. There's a methodology. There are some suggestions, but the actions you take will create very different outcomes for each of you. And that's why we're here on the call to share that experience. What are your questions that come from that? And what is your particular and unique experience? Some of it won't be unique because we're human. A lot of it will be unique because you're you. And then, of course, step 10 cleans the channel on a daily basis. That was part of my little reflection between our set-aside prayer and the Serenity Prayer this morning for me, this here, just before I started my presentation. Make me a clear channel, remove the disturbances and the impediments to my effective communication of whatever the Spirit is intending for me to communicate today. Step 10 does that on a spot check basis. We looked at some of the history of AA through the prefaces and the forewords. But then we started for real this month on step 1, and we looked at the doctor's opinion. What's wrong with my body? Because that's his major opinion, that we have some type of a physical deficiency. He's a medical doctor, but he's also a psychiatrist, so he alludes to the mind, but he doesn't describe it. He talks about the body pretty much. He identifies his opinion, not science, his opinion, not research, but based on his exposure and experience to an awful lot of people he tried to help. Very unsuccessfully, by the way, mostly. That was his big frustration, but he was humble and he kept trying. And he was sincere and compassionate. And he used the word craving in a very unique way. I'm not going to go over that now except to confirm it. Craving happens biologically. Craving is not before I ingest the substance or engage in the process. Craving, in the doctor's opinion, is his opinion about the mechanism of a defective body, of unhealthy biology. And it's not all human beings, it's just unique to addicts. Substance addicts, alcohol, drugs, and food. Once I imbibe in the drink or engage in the drug or take the bite of food, it pulls a trigger, biological trigger, that's biochemical. And once I start, I cannot stop. There are variations on that theme, as I mentioned. I'm a periodic, my wife was a chronic. Periodic means it doesn't happen every time, chronic does. He says it looks like an allergy. Again, he's using a metaphor. He's not doing science. It's his opinion. An allergy, an abnormal reaction to a substance in the process addiction, an abnormal reaction to a process. Gambling, pornography, as we've mentioned many times. And then we looked at Bill's story, the first half of Bill's story, not the second half, just the first half, pages 1 through 8, so that we could see his deterioration. Oh, we got a real glimpse at his grandiosity and his low self-esteem, if you have any psychological understanding of personality. And then when you take a look at his history, it explains it, of course. Raised by a grandparent after being abandoned by his two parents when he was 12. And his own physical condition. He was very tall, very thin, very gangly, very awkward, but very bright. And he wanted to be the number one man. Well, that's his overcompensation. And he didn't have a whole lot of talent, but he was the captain of the football team, the captain of the baseball team, the lead musician in the orchestra. It's wonderful to understand parts of that because it explains how he actually took after his recovery. Now, it may not have been conscious. My own spiritual director, when I had some concern about leading workshops, and I expressed that I didn't think it would be good for me to have the kind of recognition that I was beginning to get and the kind of comments, positive comments that I was beginning to get, because it was inflating it potentially could inflate my ego. And he said, you need to be concerned. You really do need to be concerned because it's a perfect mechanism for you to become grandiose and very self-centered, more than you are today. This was 30 years ago. He said, but never let your concern get in the way of your ministry because you are actually helping people. And then he quoted the Bible. God writes straight with crooked lines. What a consolation that was for me. In the program, you hear in the meetings many times, and you may have even had a sponsor tell you, your liabilities will become your assets. Bill says that in the big book. He says it in the 12 and 12 in many different ways. Our liabilities, our deficiencies become the very tools for our being able to help other people because they can identify with our humanness. They can identify with our brokenness. And I was broken and now I've been healed. That's the message. And you can believe it or not, and you can trust it or not. And if you believe it and trust it, you'll do the work, and then you'll know yourself. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, But by the end of this journey, you will look back over your shoulder and you go, oh, now I know what Herb was talking about. An experience of transformation, an experience of conversion, an experience of radical awakening. I didn't know that I was asleep dreaming that I was awake. That's not my line. It's a line from a philosopher, Gurdjieff, a Russian philosopher. Most human beings, he said, are asleep dreaming that they're awake. It's fabulous. Because it fits us. And that's why Bill, I believe, wrote out the 12th step the way he did. Having had a spiritual awakening, he realized we were spiritually asleep. And so page 8 describes his bottom, and then I asked you to go to page 17 to 23, because it continues with Bill's commentary on what the doctor's opinion was, which is that we have a defective body. We're still in that part. This is the final piece, and I asked you to take a look at and finally answer those questions in the body exercise, the body worksheet. And we'll look at that here in a minute. On page 17, he says, we're hopeless. Thousands of men and women, once hopeless. Listen to this. Nearly all have recovered. This was written in 1939. He had 4 years of sobriety. There were less than 100 people. So it was revised, this line, when it says thousands of men and women. The original line in the first edition said 100. It actually wasn't 100. He stretched it to make it look good. He's a salesman, never lets the facts get in the way of a good story. But, you know, there were probably 90, 91 people, most of whom actually long-term did not stay sober. And that's one of the reasons they began changing stories, because they didn't want a story in the book of people who, in fact, had relapsed. So the first edition was 1939, and the second edition was 1955. He says there are two components to our fellowship. One is a feeling of a common peril down at the bottom, a powerful cement which binds us. But the other component is a common solution. That's the name of the chapter, isn't it? There is a solution. So after Bill's story, it's kind of like he went down to his bottom on page 8. The part we haven't looked at is that he was spiraled back up to a very healthy and active, vital spiritual life on pages 9 through 16. We'll look at that when we go into step 2. He says, this is the great news of the book. The word gospel means good news. That's what this is, good news. There is a solution. Page 18 tells us some more about the illness. It engulfs all those whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings understanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, and sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list, and each of you could, with your own particular, unique, personal impact on yourself and those around you. He describes what otherwise could have been named sponsorship in those last 2 paragraphs on that page. I'm not going over them. You can go over them. One is in italics. It says that you probably can't help anybody until you've done a 4th and 5th step. That was the interpretation of my own sponsor back in my first year of recovery, because I wasn't properly armed with facts about myself until I did a 4th and 5th step. The truth is, I wasn't properly armed with facts about myself until I did a 4th and 5th step out of the big book when I was 5 years sober. But I didn't know, and he didn't know that we didn't know. And you just do the best you can. And it worked. We do the best we can, and it works. For you perfectionists out there, I know there's 30 to 40% of you that are perfectionists. or inclined in that direction. Relax. Even your perfectionism is part of your brokenness. Embrace it. Breathe. Be patient. Take action. Breathe. Be patient. Take action. That's a formula to live by. The final paragraph is a wonderful profile of sponsorship. The word sponsor is not in the big book. There were many places in step 3 and 5 that he could have put the word if it was part of the culture, but obviously it wasn't in 1939. When he published the 12 and 12 in 1951, 12 years later, the 12 and 12 is replete with many references to sponsorship. So in those 12 years, the term came into the culture of the 12-step fellowship. We feel the page 19. We feel the elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. Notice what he's saying. The first half of the first step is important, but it's not the real problem and it's not the real solution. A much more important demonstration of principles. How then can we present that which has been so freely given to us? Middle of the page. We have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it and sharing our combined experience and knowledge, which suggests a useful program for those who are concerned about addiction. I'm changing a little bit to reflect the population that we have on this workshop. Some of you are not alcoholic. Some of you have process addiction. It may be drugs or food. Or some of you have none of the process, the substance addiction, and have a process addiction. Maybe you're codependent, coming from an adult child of an alcoholic or dysfunctional home. Many of us come from that. Sometimes it manifests in a substance addiction and sometimes it doesn't. Al-Anon is filled with people who have a process addiction of codependency, manipulation and control to create a safe environment for themselves, and their delusion is for you. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which makes us more useful. Notice it doesn't say which makes us more happy, because it's not about us ever in the big book. Oh yes, we are promised to have neutrality with regard to our addiction. Oh yes, we are promised to have a life of contentment, happy, joyous, and free. Absolutely. But that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is to be a channel of usefulness. Channeling grace from the power other than ourselves into the community around us. The St. Francis prayer is a wonderful prayer that captures that. It's great that Bill uses that in chapter 11 in the 12 and 12. That's why they call it the, quite frankly, AA prayer. The St. Francis prayer in chapter 11. Becoming a channel. Oh, I love that image. Take it into meditation. Use that prayer, the words and the concepts and the phrases. It might take you a month or 2 or 3 to go through that prayer slowly, trying to understand and connect to the force and the power and the understanding and the experience of those words and that concept. It doesn't matter that St. Francis didn't write it. The prayer surfaced in 18th or 19th century. St. Francis was probably around in the 12th century. But it captures his principles and his way of life, and that's good enough for me. On page 20, our very lives depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. Now, that sounds like some type of a mandate from the outside, and that never works. The answer to why do you do step 11 because my sponsor told me is not a good answer. The answer to, well, why do you help others? Oh, because it's step 12 and they tell me to. That's not a good answer. But it's good enough in the beginning because we don't know that we don't know. But the real solution is when it becomes an organic development inside of us and becomes a natural part of our perception and our action. I had a black robe on and I called myself a monk. I took the black robe off and I did very unmonkish things for a long time, because it was put on to me from the outside. It never came up from the inside. In 1988, I was 4 years sober and I had a conversion experience from the inside. It wasn't the only and final, it was the beginning of the thawing out of the inside. I had thawed out on the outside through AA and the meetings for 4 years. And then in 1988, I did this work and I began to thaw out. Hear the words, please. I began to thaw out on the inside. And 3 journeys through the steps over the next 12 years. And I do believe I was in a major thawing out experience by the end of 1996, when I had done this work over a 2-year period with a man, Joe Hawk. We have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. Bill is reiterating now and confirming the doctor's opinion. What do I have to do? The purpose of this book is to answer this question specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. Notice, he doesn't say we are going to tell you what we know, what we thought, what we felt, what we talked about. No, he says we're going to tell you what we did. Action is the magic word. That's a phrase from Chuck Chamberlain, one of the AA wisdom men back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. Died in 84, just before I came in. I never met him, but he became my hero from listening to his talks and reading his book, A New Pair of Glasses. There's a description of the deterioration of alcoholism from the moderate drinker to the hard drinker to the alcoholic. If you want a better description, go to pages 108 to 110. I believe it's in To the Wives, and it's describing for the Al-Anon 4 stages of the deterioration of alcoholism, so that maybe the Al-Anon can identify for her or his partner whether or not their partner is in fact an alcoholic, and this might explain a whole bunch of suffering. They have a beautiful description. Well, it's 2 pages, page 108 to 110, of 4 stages of that deterioration. It's worthwhile reading for yourself, perhaps, or maybe for somebody in your periphery. Page 21. He's making that distinction because he's saying that the moderate drinker and the hard drinker can quit anytime that suffering gets too bad, or they have some type of an external mandate. Like a court says you're going to go to jail, or an employer says you're going to get fired. Oops, okay, I change. An alcoholic can't do that. They will go to jail. They will lose their job. That's the real alcoholic. It says here on page 21, begins to lose all control once he starts to drink. This is the teaching of the body. This is the allergy and the craving that Dr. Silkworth is talking about. Bill is emphasizing it here for us. Jekyll and Hyde, a wonderful reference to the novel about somebody changing radically to a different kind of personality. Many of us have had that experience. A senseless series of sprees he talks about. Page 22, our behavior patterns differ, our addiction patterns differ. I've stressed that. The question is, here in the middle of the paragraph on page 22, Why do I take that first drink when I've had a series of catastrophic experiences? So he says the body is a problem, but it's not the problem. We are positive. Once we take any alcohol, whatever, into our system, something happens bodily and mentally, which makes it virtually impossible for me to stop. The experience of any addict will abundantly confirm this. So then he's saying, so the body is not the problem. The mind is clearly the problem. Why do we take that first drink? If we have a history of losing control once we do. I mean, we're smart people, and most people learn from negative consequences of their behavior. That's an indication right there that something's wrong with us. There's a percentage of us that are abnormal. Bill calls us mental defectives. I don't like the word, but once I grasped this next section that we're going to look at, it's the only explanation. I have a deficient mind. It doesn't process reality successfully. My mind does not successfully process alcohol, but my body does not successfully process alcohol, but my mind does not successfully process reality. Over a 20-year period, I didn't learn from the negative consequences. What is that? I never connected the dots. What is that? I never put together the puzzle pieces. I didn't know there were puzzle pieces. What is that? I'm intelligent, educated, self-reflective, on a journey to be a better person, truly, truly, intentionally. And yet I was deteriorating in my alcoholism, and I did not see the spiral down. And we're going to address that when we take a look at the mind in our next assignment. So that's assignment 4. In the set of assignments that you have, and I'm assuming you've downloaded it, assignment 4, item number 1 and 2, but I'm modifying item 2. It says read from pages 23 to 43. I'm going to cut that basically in half. Read from 23 to 35. Read from 23 to 35. Because that warms us up to the whole question of and nature of the mind problem. And then page 35 to 43, the end of the chapter, allows us to see a couple examples of, so that we really get an understanding of and hopefully an experience of what we're talking about here with regard to obsession and delusion. I mentioned that you might want to take a look at the Way of Life document for 2 reasons. On page 14, there's a roadmap of the circle and the triangle, the body, mind, and will. And you can see a good summary now of the body, and you can see the words that we've spent a lot of time understanding. Then you can take a look at the mind and similarly see the highlight of the words that we'll be looking at, that you're asked to look up definitions of in assignment 4. And then finally, we'll look at unmanageability, the problem of the will. We'll spend a month on the problem of the mind like we spent a month on the problem of the body. Then we'll spend a month on the problem of the will. We'll spend 3 months on step 1. Why do we do that? Because it's the foundation of the arch through which we walk to a new freedom, to use Bill's architectural analogy. It's the foundation. He doesn't say it as clearly as I'm saying it. More about that later. And then you might read, but don't answer. Please do not answer the questions on page 16 with regard to the mind. But read them so that you're aware of some of the considerations as you're doing the reading of the big book, and perhaps the reading of the 12 and 12. I say perhaps on the 12 and 12 because you can read step 1 at any time, obviously, in the 12 and 12, and you can read it more than once. You might want to read it at the conclusion of your work on the body, and read it again at the conclusion of your work on the mind, and read it again at the conclusion of your work on the will. Because Bill doesn't make all these distinctions that I do. He certainly didn't structure step 1 in the same way that I'm presenting it to you. His step 1, and I'll talk more about that next week, is focused on the first half of the first step, addiction, alcohol, the problem. Although he references later on unmanageability in a way that he unpacks it to allow us to understand what he meant by it, he didn't package it as part of step 1 like I will. And I got that insight and training and exposure and experience when I was 10 years sober, thanks to the work of Joe Hawk, who introduced me to the set-aside prayer and who introduced me to unmanageability, the spiritual malady. I did not know, I did not see, I did not understand, and I did not experience unmanageability consciously until I was 10 years sober, after having 2 spiritual awakenings. I'm saying it that way so that you get a real sense that this is a process. And you can't hurry it. And you can't have the experience by wanting it or arm wrestling it to the ground. You show up, you do the work, you breathe in, you pray, you talk to somebody about your work, and then attempt to be aware of what's going on. Mostly I was aware of what was going on in retrospect when I looked back over my shoulder. Hardly ever when I was actually having the experience. All right. So I'd like to talk to some people now.
But I really, in the back of my mind, you know, it's I guess you would call it a reservation. Well, I ain't no guess.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
I don't trade. I just can't identify food like I did with my alcoholism.
All right. So I think it's, you know, the reason I'm asking, I'm interested in your experience, but I'm also attempting to bring to consciousness of the people on the call that I'm suggesting a focus. It doesn't matter whether you're an alcoholic, a drug addict, a food addict, a pornography addict, a work addict. It doesn't matter. And you may have all of that, but I'm suggesting that you focus on one particular area of suffering in your life today. And you've done a beautiful job of identifying an area where you have reservations.
And the reason why I say that, I can't, right now, I can't see the suffering that I did when it can't come to food with my alcoholism. I don't know.
All right. Maybe it's not about suffering. Maybe it's about your concern for loss of control. Let's explore that just for a minute. Did you ever eat something and use it more than you intended?
No.
Well, then you're not a food addict. Why are you concerned about food? You said you've been in FA for 6 years. That's a pretty rigorous program. What motivated you to go and stay?
Well, it's more structured than AA. I lost weight, and it's just like in the big book, okay, where it says I stopped just in time, and which I truly believe. I mean, I had gained the weight, lost the weight, gained the weight, and lost the weight. So why wait for a fatal illness to happen before you take care of it?
I mean, first of all, what I'm hearing is you've been successful with FA. So it sounds like it's a great diet program for you.
Well, and along with the steps, it has helped me to really go deeper into the steps.
Yeah, excellent, wonderful. So it's also some spiritual components to it. That's right. Wonderful.
And that's why I didn't know I changed the seat on the Titanic. You know, they talk about the fear, the doubt, and insecurity, and these are things that I drank over.
Yep. Well, what I would encourage you to do, because it's totally legitimate, what you're saying and the way you're understanding it, I'm not challenging that in the sense that you're wrong or right, really seriously. I think it's wonderful that you've found a program that supports your desire to have the right body size. The question that I want you to ask yourself in the spirit of set-aside is to take a look at the body worksheet and look at those questions from the perspective of food. Not many people join a 12-step program and are successful for the purposes of it being a diet. Many people join one of the 8 different eating disorder 12-step programs for a diet, and they're never successful long term, because it's not about a diet if you're an addict. Now, you have the good fortune of already being an alcoholic and having recovered from that, and it sounds like you have a reasonable, vibrant spiritual life, which has probably helped you connect to the FA program. As you said, you went deeper with the step work, which is just terrific. But it may be that you just had unhealthy habits with regard to food, that you weren't an addict, and that's just fine. But wouldn't it be good to know that? So ask those questions in the body worksheet about your food history, and be open about it to yourself. I don't need to know, nobody else needs to know, but you do. I believe it will be very helpful. Are you in FA because you just had unhealthy habits and you needed some human development support? Or are you in FA because you're a food addict and you need God's support? It's a very critical question.
I need God's support.
Well, no, see, but you're answering it without
Okay. I got
responding
you.
to my suggestion. Yeah, because that's what you want to think and believe, because that's your trigger. But I want you to be much more challenging to yourself in asking those questions. I mean, we all need God's support just to navigate life, quite frankly. I believe that. But I think it's important for you to know, each of us to know, whether we actually have an addiction in a particular area or not. That's all. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Well, that was a very, I believe, helpful conversation for a lot of people on the line, for them to get a little deeper connection to their own addiction that might be addiction, or it just might be unhealthy habits at this time. That's a very important distinction. Because if it's only an unhealthy habit, then with some knowledge and some effort and some good training, I mean, you can deal with it. But if it's an addiction, then the next component is having a power in your life other than your own power. And that requires a spiritual way of living for that particular addiction.
When it came to the history of my attempts, the first one I put down was a lap band. I had a lap band surgically put in like 12 years ago, and it caused me nothing but grief the entire time I had it. But it was only a month ago that I actually had it removed, because I couldn't believe, I didn't have trust and faith that once I had it removed, the weight would stay off. Because I didn't lose any weight based on the lap band. I did it all through abstaining from my trigger foods. So that was a big moment for me, being able to have that lap band taken out, with the trust and the faith in my higher power that everything would be fine. And the other issue I had was in the 5th about honesty, and how have I been honest about it with myself or others. And it was only in the last 6 years that I even knew about food addiction. I'm 61 years old now, and the entire time I struggled with feelings of failure, that I was weak-willed, and of course I blamed everyone else for my position too, that if that if you had my life, you'd want to eat too, because I was so miserable. And if I could only control everyone, and if they would only do what I said, I wouldn't have the stress, and then I wouldn't have to eat the way that I ate. So it's coming to grips with the honesty part of it. And even now in recovery, it's constantly being rigorously honest with myself, because I do tend to take the easy road out and want to be dishonest through omission, or not include everything in my daily check-ins with my sponsor, or, you know, a little white lie won't hurt anything. So that's
and oh, by the way, there are no white lies.
yeah, exactly.
No, that's wonderful rigor on your part, is the self-honesty and the way you included it in accountability. Because I cannot be self-honest and hold myself accountable, because I will cut myself some slack in my inherent dishonesty. And that's what you said. So you have to reach out and to an objective person as a sounding board for you. That's my recommendation to everybody. Whether you call it a sponsor or not, I call it an accountability partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I do find myself slipping back. That if I, you know, the permission giving, I give myself one extra green bean, then I'm going to take a healthy lump.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm really good to myself.
Yeah.
If only I could be as compassionate for other people, right? Yeah, right.
And I really appreciate the summaries you do at the beginning. It really helps me. Each time I get a little bit more and a little bit more out of it. So I'm very appreciative of that as well. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate your acknowledging that, because actually I was challenging myself today, because I know I've said many of those things previously, and I'm going, wow, I wonder if they're getting tired of hearing all of this again. And yet it's never the same for me. I don't have a script. I come prepared in prayer and meditation, really, to be a spontaneous channel of grace. And I want to give a setting for people as to where we've been and where we are and where we're going. And that's really the purpose. And if most people are like me, they need to hear it more than once.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
I'm a recovered compulsive overeater, so I know about the body thing, but I can't wait until we get to the will. You helped me so much a couple weeks ago when you talked about our broken will, because we talk on Vision about willingness and how it's overrated, and I never understood that until you said that. So
yeah, well, and I appreciate the comment and also the implied patience with it, because I'm doing it by the numbers, and we're making artificial distinctions, because the body and the mind and the will are me. It's all integrated. It's all working at the same time. I literally existentially don't have a body and a mind and a will that are operating separately. No, they're all operating together and influencing one another. But for our understanding of underneath and how it works, I believe that gives us a much deeper experience with our powerlessness when I understand that in the body, it's literally biology. That was a huge breakthrough. I mean, you can really get it when you make the parallel to an allergy. How much control do I have over my cat allergy? Well, that would be none, other than staying away from cats. And it really helped me understand, oh yeah, well, alcohol for me is the same kind of biological disruptor as cats are. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
I literally grieved the loss of sugar. I literally felt every step of the denial through the acceptance. It took like 6 months for me to...
You're very fortunate it only took 6 months, quite frankly. I'll bet you on this line, we've got over 60 people on the line. The food addicts are jealous that you got it in 6 months. Because most of the processed foods that we have available to us are saturated with sugar.
Yes, I was amazed to, somebody said it's in table salt. I'm like, what do you mean? And I guess it's a stabilizer. But I had to give my table salt away.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, you're probably better off anyway, unless you have a salt deficiency, right? And then you could probably take a pill for that.
I started to feel like I was killing myself with food again. And it's a horrible feeling. Like I feel like my thinking was off. My body functions were off. Talk about the allergy when I took in the flour and the sugar. I started out of nowhere starting to sneeze. I had the aches and the pains, the inflammation in the body, the congestion. I couldn't breathe as much as well anymore, and I was hot all night long. The night sweats. So it definitely changes how my body reacts. And I really wanted to get back to, because I had abstinence for about 2 years before that, and I just wanted to get back to that feeling. It's such a light feeling.
And that is a pretty consistent answer that I get from people who get traction, and that is, I got tired of suffering.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, that's the bottom.
Yeah.
I got tired of suffering. And then I asked this man, when he said that, I said, then what? He said, I was willing to take direction.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. And then I said, and then what? Then I followed the suggestions and with action.
Mm-hmm.
And I got, oh, there's a formula. I got tired of suffering. I was willing to take direction, and I got into action. I mean, if anybody leaves with that formula today, our today was very successful.
Yeah, I need to get to
But see, and just to make it very conscious, you got tired of suffering, you prayed,
yeah.
You listened to somebody's suggestion, and you took the action that was suggested.
Yes.
It really is the basic formula for success.
Yeah, because before that, I was blaming everybody else. You know, everybody else was the reason why I wasn't happy, was the reason why I was fat and overweight, was the reason why I had diabetes and I couldn't breathe at night. It was everybody else. But coming into program, it now became me taking action. And that action is taking suggestion. And I had to take whatever suggestion possible that they gave to me, whether I liked it or not.
That's it. I'm glad you added that. That's exactly.
Back to the rebellious side.
I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to like it. I just have to do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's what I found. I found once I got back into the food, I became rebellious again. And I wasn't taking suggestion again. And the difference was having to take suggestion and action. Yeah. So thank God I'm back on the road. Yeah.
Well, in fact, I hope you just heard what you said, because there's two things involved. One, the humility that I needed help. Number two is the gratitude that I got it.
Amen. Yep.
Yeah. Amen is right.
I am finding it a bit hard in that I've got a number of different addictions and they're overlapping.
What is your primary problem? So what is your primary source of suffering in terms of your addiction?
Probably codependency at the moment.
That's a really difficult one. Yeah, I can see that. All right. So what do you think you want to do in terms of a focus for this journey through the steps?
Well, this is hard because I guess this whole sense of reality, you know, is getting to me. And one of the main, I was adopted. One of the main things I wanted was my own family. And
so Roz, did you just hear yourself?
Yeah.
You're not 18 or 21. I think that's probably accurate.
Yes, you're right.
Right. And you still got the story that I was adopted. Give me a break.
Yeah, I know.
Give me a break.
Yes.
Why don't you release that story? It's ancient history.
Yeah.
All right. You're probably a couple decades beyond 21.
Yes. Quite a few.
Yeah. It's time that you let go of this myth about your adoption. It has nothing to do with who you are today.
No.
All right. But you will find more of that. I'm just trying to give you a sense of reality here as you're beginning to engage in this process. So let me ask the question again.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think you want to work on in terms of a focus for as an addiction for doing this work?
Oh my God.
Well, okay, so you don't know. That's fine. I'm glad. No, wait. I'm really glad for the hesitation, because that meant that you gave it some thought. You see, you didn't give me an answer to satisfy me. You took the question in and held it. That's terrific. So I'm going to ask you to not answer it right now, but to
Yeah.
hold that question for a while until you come to a conclusion. What focus do you want? And you might want to have that as part of your daily reflection. What do I want to, where's the primary source of my suffering? And what do I want to focus on? And you're asking the question, not of yourself. You're asking the question of the spirit that is in you.
Yeah. I mean, I find I desperately want my family back together, but my ex-husband still drinks, and that makes me question whether or not I can. And so it all gets muddled up together. So
Yes,
in
it
order
does.
to,
Yes. Yeah. No, life is complicated. And once you begin praying about it, sorting it out, you might even want to do a little writing, like journaling or reflecting in writing. And do you have a sponsor?
I have, and I was talking to him about doing a step 4.
Why don't you do step 1? Because that's the one we're on.
Yeah.
No. Did you just hear what you said?
Yes.
Your head's not in the game, girl.
I think what it was that I feel that the channel keeps kind of getting clogged up because I've got
That's
so
because
many.
you keep getting distracted.
Yes.
If you want to be active on this call, it means that you do the work that's assigned in between the calls.
Yeah.
We're on step 1.
Right.
Do the work on step 1.
Yes, and I know I need to because I'm starting to
No,
question.
actually, you don't know that because you're not doing it.
No. Okay.
So ask yourself the question, do you need to? Do you want to? Those are 2 questions. Do I
Yes, I
need
do.
to? Do I want to? And will I? 3 questions. All right?
Yes. I know I need to. I think I'm getting distracted because of the whole issue of my ex and having a family and.
That's again another story that is a lie.
Right. Oh God, is it?
Well, you may only hear me. You may not know that what I'm saying is in fact true or your experience. And I don't know it, but I am challenging you.
Yeah, no, yeah, okay.
All right?
Yeah, thank you. You've given me some things to really think about.
That was the point.
Yeah.
So there was something that you said today in the meeting, and I didn't quite catch it because it was right before you went into the homework, and I was kind of shifting focus. But it was something to do with, I can't stop because I have an abnormal reaction to the substance, but I take the first drink or the first bite or whatever your thing is because I react abnormally to life. I don't know if you use those exact words, but I was trying to.
I didn't use the exact words, but you got the general feel of it. Yes. As I mentioned, it's hard to separate the body and the mind. And what you're just talking about is that sort of collusion of the body and the mind. Once I start, the trigger's been pulled and I'm lost. The real question is, why do I start? We haven't really taken a look at that yet. We'll be looking at that for the first time next week. But go ahead.
So I know it's coming, and I know I need to hear it because I've just had an experience with it. As far as these answers to my questions, and you said something earlier today about periodic versus chronic. The reality is when I'm not in program, I'm chronic. My reaction to life and to food and to people is extremely painful, and it is completely outside of my ability to rein it in on my own.
Yeah.
When I'm
When you're in program, yeah, go ahead.
I experience some relief. It's not complete relief. And
I've never heard it expressed that way. It makes total sense.
And so sometimes what I struggle with is I don't remember the pain that I was in before I came into program, because I came into the 12 steps in 2013. For me, it's a long time to remember. I know that maybe my memory is not what some people's are, but and then I have slips, and I have slips in program, and they're not so bad, Okay, so it's an evening. Oh, maybe it's a weekend, but it's not the months that I experienced outside of program.
Recovery is progressive too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm realizing that, and I'm starting to be gentle with myself on that, because what I realized...
Gentle in the sense of the compassion of understanding your deficiencies, and yet not gentle enough that you don't show up and you don't talk about it and you don't take some action. You see what I mean? So yes. Gentle doesn't mean totally passive. It just means compassionate.
Yeah, exactly. It just means that I don't have to bring the hammer down on I'm not good enough and that's why I slipped.
I hope everybody's hearing this. That is exactly right. Yes.
And, going through this exercise is good for me, because without really thinking about it, what I'll do is I'll remember this last time, and I'll remember, maybe the time 5 months ago, and it'll be like, oh, well, it really wasn't it wasn't totally out of control.
You're so prepared for our work on the mind, because the problem is that we don't remember to remember.
Yeah.
We don't remember to remember. That's the peculiar deficiency of the addict mind.
And so that's where I'm at today, is just trying to recognize that it's not all about me, and it's not all about me tightening down the screws and getting it all under control. Right now, my life is unmanageable. My work is unmanageable. After this call, I am going to be working in preparation for something on Monday that was unexpected. And whatever I do, it's going to be
so actually
exactly
your work is manageable, but it's just not living up to your expectations.
It's not what I want.
But there's the key, and you're preparing yourself for our discussion on unmanageability, because what you've just said is that actually you're managing your work quite well. I mean, it's not what you wanted, but you're able to work today to be prepared for tomorrow.
Yeah.
So you're managing quite well. You're just not controlling. Big difference. We don't control anything. That's the Serenity Prayer. We don't control anything. I've lost the word control. I threw it out about 20, 30 years ago, because I realized I have influence, but I have no control. And I have very little influence, but I do have some. I could work today like you're going to work today to get ready for tomorrow. That's influence.
And it's going to be good enough. And just like the work that I did today to prepare for this meeting was good enough. It's not what I wanted. It's not to the level that I wanted it to be, but.
And see, I can hear in the tone the acceptance of that as a compromise, and accepting the reality of the compromise, which is probably not something that you do easily.
Does not come naturally to me, Herb.
I realized when you're talking that I was periodic, I wasn't chronic. And it really helped me when I wrote down the specific examples of, not being able to stop. Like when I was 18, I was working in Europe. I was in Vienna. It was a hot summer. I could hardly walk down the street. My thighs were chafing so much, stuff like that. Or just, I was in China for one night. I ate dinner. I ate 2 dinners. You know, one was not enough.
May as well take advantage of being in China, right?
That's right. I love Chinese food. So anyway, I mean, who does that? You know.
Well, apparently you do.
I do.
So what's that about?
It's about that I couldn't get enough. In fact, I mean, I was breaking chairs in my office, but I thought a client was doing it. I mean, I got to a certain weight where I was like, a couple chairs at my office collapsed, and at my home too, my dining room.
That's got to be very emotionally painful and embarrassing.
Yeah, well, you know what? I didn't realize that's what was happening. You know, it all happened kind of in the same period. I had a lady who was fatter than me come to take one of my classes, but I realized like denial is a real issue for me. It's a real issue.
We will see that as a real issue for all addicts.
Yeah.
That's when we'll really deep dive into the mind problem. But go ahead. So focus on the body problem. That is, once you start, you cannot stop.
Yeah. You know, I don't know if that's true, but obviously it was true. I mean, I think I'm in denial about that. I remember even right now, you know,
that's why the body exercise is so important, because I want you to look exactly at your history. And what I did was, and you've probably heard me say this, in the hospital program that I was there to support my wife's recovery, they asked me to do an inventory of my history, my chronology of alcohol drinking. And I did bullet point. What did I drink? When did I drink? And what happened? And as I did that, it took me about an hour to 2 hours to do. At that point, I was 43. So I'd been drinking since I was 12. So I had about a 30-year span of time. It took me a couple hours to do this bullet point. And then when I read it to a group of people in the hospital, it washed over me. Oh my God, I've got a history of a problem with alcohol, which I had never seen to that moment. I had never seen it.
Well, I have a step guide, and she asked me about my weight over my life. I was about 180 pounds most of my adult life. And then I started gaining about 10 pounds a year when I had a family and stuff.
That's not, wait. See, you're into the story now. You missed my point. You missed my point.
Okay.
My point is we're focused on the body. My point is that focus says, did you ever eat more than you intended? And so, no, this is rhetorical. Yeah. This is for you now. When you're looking at the body questions and that chronology of bullet point history, that's the only question.
Okay, that's
not that
the
you're
only
fat,
question.
Not that you broke chairs, not that other people are fatter than you. That's all history, story. It has nothing to do with this exercise. The exercise is for you to take a look at, did I ever sit down and eat more than I intended? Ever?
Yeah, yes.
And what does that look like?
Yeah. Okay, here's a great example that happened frequently, which was I would get a plate of food at home or at somebody else's home or at an ethnic restaurant. It would look huge. Well, 5 minutes later, I would have eaten half of it, and I think, oh, this isn't enough. This isn't...
Okay. All right, so now you're getting into the story, see, because this isn't about story.
Yeah.
This has only one answer. When you sat down in that exotic restaurant to eat, what was your intention?
Well, that's a good question.
It's the only question. No, it's the only question.
Okay, my intention was typically to get as full as I could.
All right.
I think that was not,
And what did that mean? Translate that into quantity that you were intending to eat. So I need everybody to be specific and not general. That's why I'm focusing and focusing and focusing. Go ahead.
I don't know if I ever had, I don't know if I ever had a quantity. I know sometimes like I would buy groceries and I would think they would last a week and they would not. I don't know.
That's not an answer to the question.
Okay.
It's close. No, it's in the neighborhood. But you're right. You're very much on it. You see, this is going to be a new realization for you. When I sat down, it never occurred to me to have the intention of quantity.
Yeah, I never had the intention of quantity.
And
that's
yet,
true.
You're tens of pounds overweight and concerned about it, but you never had the intention of that. That has to be an insight for you.
Well, I was in Weight Watchers a couple times, and I would be one of those people who bought those 2-point bars. Let's say I had like 28 points. Okay, when I was in Weight Watchers, I had a certain amount that they wanted me to eat per day. Well, a lot of times I would eat that amount by 2 p.m. or something. And then
so
actually,
wait. This is really good. Now you're thinking the way I would like you to think.
Okay.
And so you had being in Weight Watchers, you had the intention of complying with their direction, and their direction was to have 28 points. That was your intention.
Yeah, that was my intention at that time.
Did you ever go beyond 28 points?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you know what?
No,
but
it's not a
much.
trick question. I heard your pause. It's not a trick question, because in your head you go, are you kidding? I did it every time.
No, I think I might have quit. I think, I think that
you just
sure.
quit. You just quit Weight Watchers.
Yeah, I wanted to go over 28 points. I remember.
Bam, you're on it. That's
Okay.
right.
Yeah,
that's
could
right.
I comply with Weight Watchers? No.
Right.
I actually, the leader.
No, here's your chat. I mean, everything else now, you're very capable of talking in terms of long-term stories and windy sentences.
Yeah.
And that's not going to help you.
Okay.
I want you to focus as specifically as I've attempted to help you focus on that body worksheet. And the only question is, when I sat down, what was my intention with regard to eating and quantity?
Okay.
All right. And then take a look at each year since you were 21.
Okay.
And just put a bullet point. I'm not asking for a story or complete sentences. Bullet point.
Okay.
Of memories in a radar sweep. Nothing really, in any detail, but a radar sweep of that particular year. All right?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Tend to be very hard on myself. So for me, I think self-compassion and acceptance of all the facets of myself is crucial. I did not grow up in an alcoholic family. I did marry someone who suffers from alcoholism. And I guess what this is, like when I focus on, I did the body work. For me, it's more, I think, is what you call a process addiction. In other words, the unmanageability comes with thoughts and feelings, the fear. So I've identified, what happens when I go into that state of mind and all of that. But I guess it's just becoming aware of more and more that's being unearthed there. My emotional reliance on my companion on the journey of life, for example, and it just, I've been on the inner journey for many, many years. I'm in my late 50s now. And I know it's a process. I know that to be true because I've experienced that. So it's kind of like going more and more deeply. When you asked us, you said something last time about focusing where the suffering is today. And so I asked myself, why do I respond the way I do to life? And where is that response coming from? And it's not something that I haven't asked myself before, but I'm just so much more aware. That's all, I guess.
Well, what would you say would be the trigger for you in your process addiction?
The trigger is probably a fear of abandonment, of loss.
And all right, that's a fear that stimulates. What does it stimulate in you? How do you attempt to cope with that?
I think it kind of turns into compulsive thinking, you know, a state of kind of fight and flight. And I notice the difference when my thinking is compulsive. I know it's kind of based in the mind. It's kind of habitual. It's a habitual mode of thinking versus the difference when I'm able to.
What is your intent with regard to that compulsive thinking? What is it that you want as an outcome from compulsive thinking?
Compulsive thinking, the ability.
What is your hope?
Sure, the ability to recognize it as compulsive, as coming from the ego, the mind, and being able to lovingly hold it.
Well, rather than a solution, I wasn't talking about the solution. I'm
Okay.
talking about the disease and the brokenness and the addiction.
And what was the question again?
You have a fear that's stimulating this reaction of compulsive thinking. What's the purpose of the compulsive thinking from the disease and the addiction standpoint?
I don't know.
Yes, you do.
Okay. Say the question again, Herb. I'm sorry. What is the
source is fear.
Mm-hmm.
The mechanism is compulsive thinking. What is it that you hope to achieve as a result of the outcome of the compulsive thinking?
I'm not sure. Or at least I can't figure it out.
Well, you certainly want to reduce the fear. And my sense is, in the two words I wrote down, is that I can control my environment and the people in it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And you said something, I wrote it down here. For my survival, I need you to operate according to my blank. Like that was something that I wrote down.
That's
the
it.
Desire for safety through controlling.
That's it. That's it.
So you're saying that's at the base of.
Well, that's your hope coming out of this addiction of the
Yes.
compulsive thinking. I'm going
Yes.
to create a safe environment for myself.
Right.
When I control people and I control circumstances.
Yeah, and I can't.
Do you ever make an effort to control people and circumstances?
No, I don't have. I make an effort sometimes, but I have no control whatsoever.
No, I understand that. Are you in a 12-step fellowship?
Yes, I am.
Which one?
Al-Anon. That's what I'm saying. I don't like labels. I don't like words like codependency. You know, I mean.
Well, tell me about that. I don't like those terms, codependency. Why not? Why do you resist that term?
You know, I think I know why. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, and to me, it just says I'm not perfect, and it's not okay not to be perfect. That's, you know, I know that it's like this flaw, and we're all flawed. But for me, that's like a big, oh no, I'm not okay because I'm flawed.
When you're perfect, it's your antidote to fear because you can then control the environment and the people in it. So you must be disappointed a lot.
I think so, yes. Yeah.
Well, because we can't control people or circumstances.
No.
And the reason that you went into a solution immediately is that you've been in Al-Anon with really good sponsorship for a long time, and your whole perspective has been reorganized, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And it's a wonderful life lesson, as painful as it is, you know.
Yes.
And I'm on this journey, and yeah. So thank you for letting me share, Herb.
Well, thank you for working with the questions and the dialogue, because it's good for you, but I keep saying it's actually really good for everybody else to then, as you heard many times today, people are, like you said, applying what's being said to themselves, and that's the whole point. So
yes.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Where does the responsibility for managing your career and yourself responsibly end, and where should I let go and let God do?
Are you making the effort in a very conscious and prayerful way to do the next right thing?
I have not used those words, but that's a great, okay. Next. Okay.
All right. Then you've done what you need to be doing. You're responsible for the efforts. The results are out of your control.
Yes.
So you
Well,
show up, you think it through, you get advice from professionals and maybe some spiritual people. You do the best you can. That's all you get to do. And the rest is up to whatever it is you believe is influencing all of those outcomes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, it's hard to trust the universe. But
Yeah.
well, because it's filled with people who are untrustworthy.
And this particular organization to which I belong is known for eating its young.
Well, there you go. You volunteered to be part of that organization that eats its young, and you might get eaten.
But I need to accept then that that is the higher power's will, or God's, or whatever.
It's not about higher power's will. Don't put it on God. It's just about reality. Earthquakes happen because tectonic plates shift.
Okay.
That's it. There's no other explanation. God has not got his fingers on the control of tectonic plates. It's the nature of geology. Your biology is constructed in a certain way based on millions of years of evolution of whatever produced you. Your DNA has determined that you're a white male. It's not your fault. It's just a product of the way all of the cellular structures came together. Now you have to deal with it. And whatever other kinds of characteristics that you have. And so you show up and you do the best conscious effort. It sounds to me like you're very responsible and very conscious. And your job is to figure out what is I can influence appropriately without manipulation and or attempted control.
Thank you. You're saying exactly what I was struggling to get out. Thank you.
Yeah. No,
but
I mean, it has serious consequences. So I do understand your energy.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Besides asking for the next right thing, what is the answer? Or maybe that is the answer.
I don't give answers. I give process and good questions. You're responsible to get good answers from the spirit as you hear it, as well as really good professionals as you engage them and listen to them.
Thank you all also for listening in. I appreciate it.
Thanks. No. It's an important life issue, and it's connected to what we're doing here. So in some way, yeah.
So I had to look at the list of the step guides, and I was wondering, like, because I'm concentrating more on food at the moment, I didn't see any kind of like AA.
Irrelevant.
Development.
Fellowship is irrelevant for step 3.
Oh, okay, right. Okay. All right. Okay. That's
I mean, literally irrelevant. It makes no difference what addiction that you have, or even if you have an addiction. If you've understood and experienced the step process out of the big book, you're qualified to help somebody.
Okay.
Because you're not helping them with their addiction, you're helping them with the steps.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Got it.
It's a great question. No. I'm so glad that you're asking that question. That's a very, very excellent question.
So I got my step 1 because I did some external research. I saw.
Oh, it's a recommendation not a recommendation. It's a suggestion that you try some controlled, fill in the blank. If you have any doubt, I don't agree that you do that with alcohol or drugs, because in fact, that has potentially very negative consequences in terms of jail and death and hurting other people. In food, it may have that, but I don't think it's as problematic to experiment with it.
Yeah.
But you got a good dose then, I'm hearing.
I got a dose. I saw it was like my drug. I was looking for the next fix and everything. So, listening to the call yesterday, now I understand what it's like for alcoholics who have relapses. I had relapses. So just where I'm a little bit
But
bothered.
here's something that I would ask you to ponder. One of the wisdom men in my fellowship says, the drink is not the relapse. The drink is an evidence of the relapse that happened yesterday or a week ago or a month ago. I want you to ponder that. Okay. The food is not the relapse. It's the evidence of a relapse. Because in fact, the 12 steps is not about the addiction, it's about a relationship with power. When you get a relationship with power that's effective, the addiction is neutralized.
Radio. Well,
now, that's it sounds kind of sophisticated and subtle, and yet once you really understand and or experience it, it's as subtle as a Sherman tank.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. But I'm so glad that you witnessed to, see, this is a practice. This isn't about 1 + 1 = 2. That's just too predictable. This is a practice, and you personally need to find your sort of rhythm and your unique way to travel this path and this journey. And it's wonderful that you were willing to experiment. And now you have an observation. I hope that you can discuss this with that new sponsor so that it reinforces the relationship and actually makes both of you more comfortable.
Discuss what? Discuss what we've just said there right now, or the relapse?
Yes, your level of comfort. I mean, what a wonderful bouquet of flowers to lay at your sponsor's feet. That for the last 2 weeks, there's been a level of comfort for whatever reason you've been given the gift of freedom from picking up. So it's not acknowledging her as, quote, the fairy godmother with the magic wand. It's just saying that there is something in the relationship that is neutralized your addiction.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you know, and what you're saying too is so important. There's many moving parts to the recovery process and program, many moving parts. The most important from my standpoint is that relationship with a sponsor or step guide or both of accountability. And what you're doing is witnessing to that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, having a desire to be released from my sober condition, because I struggle to handle being sober, which means I struggle to handle reality, basically. You know, so the question I ask myself is, what is my inability to cope with my humanity?
Well, it's a question that, if asked as you're asking it and resolved as you're in pursuit of, is going to deflate the ego. So your ego is fighting for its delusional life. So yeah, and the question is really relevant to unmanageability. You see, the first half of the first step is about addiction. Has nothing to do with life and reality. It has everything to do with addiction in the body and the mind problems, and that's what we're addressing right now. But you're already so engaged that you're anticipating, because addiction isn't your problem. As you've just articulated it, reality and living life is your problem. And that's the problem of unmanageability. And that's my speculation, my words. That's the human condition. Now, I believe that's what Bill implied when he said that alcohol is not the problem. It's a symbol and a symptom of the problem. That the real problem is a spiritual malady. I think that's what he means when he talks about unmanageability. And when we unpack it in a couple weeks, you'll see that unmanageability is the innate brokenness of my will. That's why I use that term brokenness. The body certainly is broken in the sense of deficient, and the mind is certainly broken in the sense of deficient. The body has an allergy, it's biological, and the mind has a defect in that it's subject to unhealthy thinking, that obsession. But the will itself, that final component that makes us specifically human, that we have free will, it is free, but it's not free in some areas. Where is it not free? It's not free in the innate inclination to choose me. My free will is not free in that area. I am hardwired to always choose me on my own power. Bill calls it on page 62, selfishness-self-centeredness. It's not a negative comment. It's an observation of the way we're built. And at the conclusion of the second paragraph on that page 62, he says we can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. What does he mean by that? What's his intent there? His intent is the same as the intent on page 43 with regard to the body and the mind. On page 43, he says there'll come a time when we have no mental defense against the first drink. We need God. On page 62, he says we can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. We need God.
You said the body and the mind and the will are ourselves.
Yes.
Are we and are you? Okay, so I asked myself, well, what's the problem with the body and the mind and the will? And you said the problem with the body is biological.
Yeah, the allergy.
Yeah, it's physical. And with the mind, for me, it's the thought process. So it's a mental.
Yes, that's correct.
Issue. But when I ask myself the question of, with regards to the will, I can kind of look at it and think, well, that's a spiritual issue.
Well, what do you mean by spiritual?
By spiritual, I mean something that relates to a power other than myself.
Well, but you have a will power. That's not spiritual. Mm-hmm. You have will
but
power.
As I said, it's a biological problem. But what?
You chose to be on this call this morning. That was your choice. Many people didn't choose that. Mm-hmm. So your free will, in one sense, is not a spiritual power. It's your power of free will. But I'm speculating, and Bill has confirmed in the big book, because he put it under the umbrella of power less, that there are parts of my will that are not free. And that's what we're talking about here. And that may require a spiritual solution. But what is that? That's not the spirit of my will. That's the dysfunction of my will that needs spiritual intervention, which means intervention by a power other than myself. And you define what it is that means. My good friend, Dr. Berger, says, it's the best in me that needs to manage the worst in me. The Buddhists talk about the higher self versus the false self. And of course, Bill talks about God or higher power, which in fact we cannot have an adequate concept of. So that would be the traditional concept of spirituality. Did that help?
Another question. Yes, it did, very much. It filled in the missing gap that I was looking for in that space. So, another question I've got is on clarification. I was out at the weekend and with a friend at a sporting event, and I drank non-alcoholic beer, and he drank beer.
Wait a minute. You drank non-alcoholic beer? Did you read the label?
Well, yeah, it said 0.0%.
How much?
0.0%.
Yeah, so it has 0.01% alcohol. Is that non-alcohol?
No,
No, the answer is no, it's not.
no.
All right, so you were
okay.
playing Russian roulette.
No, because I wouldn't pick up. It's not going to make me go and pick up what I would call a proper drink.
Really?
But
really?
I understand
So what is
actually
the doctor's opinion? I mean, what is the doctor's opinion?
That once we take the first drink, the craving
he said no
takes
alcohol at all. Entire abstinence is the only solution.
Yeah.
You're taking
okay. That was a mistake.
0.01% thinking that that's non, when it in fact is alcohol.
That probably explains why I found myself consuming non-alcoholic beer in an alcoholic way, because my behaviour was completely, I wasn't drunk at all, but yet my behaviour with this friend of mine while he was drinking alcohol was completely alcoholic.
So you began drinking non-alcoholic beer, and you intended to have one. How did you do?
Oh, I had more than one. But it's because we were watching a sporting event, and I think I need to stick with the orange juice and lemonade.
There's no question in my mind. Here's a story. Now I'm going to share a story with you. It's only one story, and in 36 years, I only have one story about it. But this is a powerful story. A man who was in my step group in 1988 had the same spiritual awakening, and he was being trained to referee national football. And after the games, they would celebrate. So he stopped drinking regular alcohol. And then I was sponsoring him. And then at one point he called me and he said he had a O'Doul's, which in our country is a non-alcoholic beer. And I asked him the same questions I asked you. He gave me the same answers you gave me. He had one and he didn't think it was a problem. And the next week he called me and we had the same conversation, and he had two. And the next week he called me and he had the same conversation, and he had 4. And the next week he called me and we had the same conversation, and he had 6. The next week he called me and we had a conversation. He says, "Oh, this conversation is irrelevant. I had a Coors."
Okay. I understand. Thank you. That does. But the thing is my behaviour was, I was looking up the word codependency, and the definition in the dictionary was codependency is a condition in a relationship where one person enables another person's addiction. Whereas my understanding of codependency was that it's a reliance on other people for approval and senses of identity. So when
I
we
like that definition better. Yeah, I like that definition better. Yeah.
Is it both those? When we talk about codependency in this room,
I'm sure it's
more
both.
the
It
second.
Depends on your perspective. Yeah.
Okay.
The person who's codependent in their behavior is getting their sense of value from other people. The person who's codependent on the other side of that is enabling people because they don't want to create any conflict, because they get their sense of value from the other person, and therefore they throw flowers at their feet that aren't warranted.
As an alcoholic, I was running away from reality. So, and clearly it's not wrong to be running the other direction, which is towards reality. But I wonder if you could just, for a minute, just talk about, at what point does thy will be done become complacency?
I think that's why we have a 10th step, because navigating life and finding balance is a practice. The 10th step helps us practice balance. And it tells us we're out of balance, meaning out of alignment with reality, when they crop up: resentment, fear, dishonesty, and selfishness. Bill puts it in the 12 and 12 as disturbance. Whenever I'm disturbed, I'm out of alignment, meaning I'm out of balance. Now, I'm less out of balance today than I've ever been, but I need to stay conscious, and that's why I do my morning meditation. And that's to try to navigate life in terms of the middle way. That's balance. You're asking the question because you know that you get disturbed when you're complacent, because you know that that's probably a sign of lack of consciousness. Complacent isn't contentment. Very different words.
Okay.
Contentment is the middle road. Complacent is unconsciousness.
Okay.
Well, you're clearly not complacent asking these questions. I think that's
Okay.
a real, actually, litmus test of consciousness, is that there's something going on in terms of questions and or concerns. I don't mean disturbance, but you're evaluating the path that you're navigating. That is hardly complacent. Gurdjieff, a Russian philosopher, and you've heard me say it before, said most human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake.
Sleep, dreaming that they're awake, yeah.
The dreaming that we're awake is complacency. The contentment is that we're awake, navigating and practicing the middle road. Yeah, nice conversation. Good, thanks. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Amen.